Hi, I'm Karen Vance, and today we're talking about storytelling for the workplace. Thousands of years ago, ancient peoples looked up into the stars at night and told stories of the origins of the world. Oral traditions and stories were passed down to preserve cultural traditions, teach youth, and share wisdom. We all tell stories every single day. You've told stories virtually every day since you were 3 years old. That's just what humans do. Telling a story helps us make meaning from our personal experiences and share them with others to create connections. We are all storytellers. And storytelling doesn't just resonate with young children. It's impactful for adults too. In a business setting, we need people to remember what we're telling them. We also need to stand out and stand above our competition. Storytelling can do both. If we want to convey information in a presentation or on a website, it sticks far better with a story. And if you tell a good story, people will form a bond with you. They'll start thinking, I like that person. They feel connected to you. It's the best form of viral advertising. But stories have a mixed review in the business world. A lot of people think they're kind of flaky. But telling stories can be really effective in self-promotion, such as in job search. If you're applying through your cover letter telling stories, your resume will tell stories, and when you're doing an interview, perhaps if you're fundraising and trying to promote your business and marketing websites and blogs, or even just trying to be a good manager by motivating, telling stories, providing vision for the future. So today, we're going to talk about why we should tell stories, what the key parts of a story are, how to tell a good story, and then we'll finish up with a summary and some key terms to remember. Kendall Haven, who's a professional researcher and master storyteller, claims that storytelling is the most effective, most efficient, and most powerful communications tool that exists. But how can that be? Scientific studies actually back this up. One thing researchers found is that storytelling connects listeners to the storytellers. When the brain sees or hears a story, its neurons fire in the same patterns as the speaker's brain. This is known as neural coupling. Good stories will engage the listener's emotions so that they feel empathy with the storyteller. Another thing is that storytelling enhances memory. When the brain is presented with factual information, only 2 of its regions activate. But when a brain is processing stories, more areas in the brain light up. People remember facts easier when they're told in a story form. Another thing they found is that stories command attention. The human brain has a strong tendency to lose focus over the day, but when listening to an interesting story, this mental wandering goes down to 0. And finally, stories can change brain chemistry and affect behavior. When you tell a story, a chemical called oxytocin is produced in the brain, a substance shown to increase generosity, compassion, trustworthiness, and sensitivity to social cues. This in turn affects behavior. For example, people are far more likely to make a money donation after hearing an emotionally impactful story. But in order to make such a big impact, stories need to be heard. And not all storytellers are successful at keeping their audience engaged. Have you ever started watching a movie and turned it off after a few minutes? Or started reading a book and never finished it? Ultimately, there are 2 key aspects to an effective story. First, it must capture and hold our attention. And the second thing an effective story does is transport us into the storyteller's world. So how can we be a more effective storyteller? Well, most stories follow what we call the dramatic arc, and it follows a pattern. As the story passes over time, the tension increases, keeping the audience's attention. So let's look at some of the key points of the dramatic arc. There's 3 acts or parts in the story. In the first act, which is not too long, the storyteller lays out the situation. What's happening? Who are the main characters? Where is this taking place? And what does the hero or heroine want to accomplish anyway? And then the main character encounters some sort of conflict or catalyst, and we call this the inciting incident that starts the rest of the story. And in Act 2, which is the longest part of the story, the main character shows the conflict as they struggle to solve their problem. They develop skills to deal with whatever forces are confronting them, and generally they get a higher sense of awareness of who they are and what they're capable of doing. Near the end of Act 2, there's some sort of a confrontation where the main character has to confront their fears or face their problems. And then in Act 3, things are resolved. Maybe there's a solution, maybe they've overcome, maybe there's success or failure. Last week, my husband and I went for a walk at Campbell Valley Park in Langley. It was a beautiful day, but earlier in the week there had been a huge rainstorm. As we got to one portion of the trail, we noticed that it was flooded over and there was a caution sign. A stream on one side of the path was now running across the trail to the other side. We were wearing hiking shoes, but the water was deep enough that it would get our feet wet. Someone had placed some pieces of wood across the water, but they were unstable and would be easy to slip off of. We would have to be really careful to cross. I was about to start balancing my way across when my husband told me to wait. He pointed out that people who had gone before us had left tall sticks behind to help people cross. I grabbed one in each hand and carefully made my way across the narrow wooden logs. Each time I stepped, I moved my sticks through the water to keep my balance. When we got to the other end safely, we left the sticks behind for other people who might come along that way. As I walked away, I thought about how grateful I was someone had been thoughtful enough to leave the sticks behind to help others, people they didn't even know, to cross the flooded path. It made me think about how, when I come to an obstacle or challenge in my life, rather than blindly moving forward, I should look around and see if I can learn from others who've passed that way. It also reminded me that we can share our knowledge and experiences to help the other people around us, even those we don't even know. So let's see how my story fits into the dramatic arc. So the situation was very brief. Did you hear it? It was a week ago. My husband and I went for a walk in Langley. It doesn't have to be very long, just enough details to give the context so that the listeners know where and when and who. So then we encountered a flooded path, and this is the inciting incident that led to the rest of the story. And so then we encountered the obstacles, and I described the wobbly wooden boards, the possibility of getting our feet wet, and then the sticks that were left behind. Would we make it across? Each of these adds tension, and the listener wants to know what's going to happen next. In Act 3, we have resolution. I did it. I walked across. But it wasn't just about carrying on with our walk. I came to think about how interconnected we are, how much we can have an impact in helping each other. And that's all part of the resolution too. And it shows the biggest reason why I'm sharing this story in the first place. It's all about what I learned on the journey. So here are some tips for telling stories in presentations and business meetings. You only get one chance to make a good first impression. You don't have to memorize your entire story, but knowing the first and final words can really help deliver them and make a good impression and have a powerful opening and conclusion. The best storytellers jump right into the action. They don't say, "I'd like to tell you a story about." Instead, they get into the action and draw the lesson out later. Some storytellers give too many details. If you do that, listeners get lost, or even worse, they get bored. But you still have to have enough details. So if you're not sure, it's a really good idea to test out your story with a few friends who might have a similar background to your audience. Let them help you know if you've got the right amount of details. As you're telling your story, look at your audience and focus on one person at a time, up to 4 to 7 seconds. Don't just wash your eye over the entire audience, but actually connect with individual people. Just like music uses moments of silence to provide impact, silence in storytelling can be very powerful. Intentional silence emphasizes what was just said or also helps people anticipate what's about to come. And before even starting, you need to make sure you know your aim. Who is your audience? What is your intent or purpose? And what message are you trying to get across? Does your story motivate the desired actions that you want your audience to do? So let's talk about 5 of the key terms that we covered throughout the presentation today. Neural coupling refers to when the brain sees or hears a story, its neurons fire in the same patterns as the speaker's brain. That means there can be an incredible connection between the storyteller and the listener. Oxytocin, when listening to an emotionally engaging story, the brain produces oxytocin, a substance that has shown to increase generosity, compassion, trustworthiness, and sensitivity to social cues. Now, the dramatic arc refers to the structure and shape that a story follows, with a relatively calm beginning, a middle where tension, character, conflict, and narrative move the story forward to a peak, and then the end of the story where the conflict is resolved. The inciting incident is the event that sets the main character on the journey that will occupy them throughout the story. And AIM is an acronym for what you need to do to plan your story before telling it. You need to know your audience, know your intent, and know what message you want to get across. So don't forget, oftentimes when we want to connect, share a message, motivate, and build trust, telling a story can be the best way to do that.